Thank you, Noreen, and all the other organisers. And I've really learned a lot actually listening to the other speakers. Very different, hearing what other countries do, and very valuable. I think particularly for us in the UK, where I personally would say we seem to lag behind other countries in terms of regulation around indoor environments, and particularly ventilation and air quality. And I think that is somewhat the background for what I'm going to talk about, which is SAMHE, and really it came out of a desire to answer a question, given where we are in the UK and how little we know and regulate about our indoor environments, how can we try and catch up? And I think one route that we wanted to explore as researchers was using schools as a way to try and create a scalable database of measurements of indoor environments in schools, and then see if we can translate that into change through sort of a government guidance-based change, but also realize that's probably going to be quite a slow route, and see if we could engender change by involving schools in monitoring their own environment. And so I don't probably need to say this, but I think there's lots of reasons to do research in schools, and one of which is that we expect our young people to spend a lot of time there. And that's how many tanker trucks full of air a typical child breathes in during their education at school. And of course, I just want to say that we talk a lot about indoor air quality and data today, but it's really about making improvements, and that comes through a tiered approach. And I think the other reason that I think schools are an important place to monitor, that they're the place where if you make change, you're affecting the people whom the change will have the longest lived effect, because they're young people, and they have the power to increasingly change how we approach things as they grow older and inherit the society that we leave for them. And at least in the UK, from a government perspective, there's a lot of focus on reducing energy and moving towards net zero. And I think we're going to fail to do that in the UK unless we think about air quality as an important part of that. And schools are great because, it is nice to think that you're working and trying to help young people, and we should accept and acknowledge that. So SAMHE stands for Schools Air Quality Monitoring in Health and Education. It's been running for about 3 or 4 years now, and it started as a large collaboration between a number of academic and government institutions. And we chose in SAMHE to measure some metrics to inform the thermal environment, temperature and humidity, and others to inform air quality, particularly carbon dioxide and particulate matter. And the way that SAMHE works is that any school can, and any member of staff can sign their school up to SAMHE by filling out a web form. We then post them a monitor. They establish their monitor on the school's Wi-Fi, and after which they start sending data which we can then analyze, but they are also given access to a free web app, and any number of pupils and staff can create their own accounts and then take part in lots and lots of activities to encourage them to learn about air quality and improve how they understand and manage the air quality in their school and beyond. And this is an example of citizen science. We're really trying to empower staff and pupils to gather data and make changes based on that in their own environment. And it has lots of benefits in terms of enabling change in a bottom-up approach, but it also provides a scalable route. We've deployed monitors in schools across all 4 nations of the UK, and we could never have afforded to do that without working with the schools. So we're now gathering about 100,000 school data days of the 5 metrics you see there every year, and they come from about 700 classrooms in about 450 schools. And in terms of the data architecture, it's quite simple, so I'm not going to dwell on it. The monitors upload data to the provider's database. We then have an API where we copy across all the data so that we have our own independent record of the minute-by-minute measurements. And so we just have a time series database which has sort of about 1 billion data points added to it every year. And alongside that, we have an SQL-based database where all of the information that we gather through the SAMHE web app is held. And then we integrate that with government databases about the size of the school, the number of pupils, and the government carries out surveys, physical surveys of the schools every 5 years on a rolling basis to monitor the condition of the schools. And that includes things like the conditions of the windows that open and the provision of the ventilation system. But it's worth saying that there's almost no ventilation systems in UK schools. You know, something like 95% rely on manually opened windows. So I'll skip through this for the audience, but based on previous questions, it's just worth saying we use the measurements of carbon dioxide and estimates of the occupancy profile based on standard UK school timetables to then infer per person ventilation rates. And one of the key things that has come out, we always knew that school ventilation was a slave to the weather, but you know, the data we've gathered at scale shows just how extreme that is. So in this autumn term, up to half term, the outdoor weather was quite warm. After half term, the temperature dropped to sort of what we would describe as intermediate temperatures, and late November through to mid December, there was a really cold spell in the UK. And what we see if we overlay those weather periods on the carbon dioxide data, we see a really marked increase in the carbon dioxide concentrations measured during cold periods. And so we think it's really important that we start providing schools with carbon dioxide monitors and really train them to better manage ventilation, particularly during a cold period, which is a challenge for them. And we have some guidance in the UK which states that the daily average in a classroom of carbon dioxide measurements shouldn't fall above 1500 ppm. And what we see over here is that when the outdoor temperature is warm, almost no schools fail to comply with this guidance. But once we're down to a sort of about 5 degrees outside, around 20% of schools are failing to comply. So it really highlights that there's this need to focus on how we support staff in ventilating their schools during cold periods. And we can translate these carbon dioxide measurements into estimates of the daily average per person ventilation rate. And the answer is it's low, however you look at it. Even in warm periods, it's about 6 litres a second per person and falling to about 4 when it's colder. And that's well below what we typically recommend in any of the guidances for adequate ventilation. So we really need to change the UK focus on school ventilations to think about good levels as compared to their current focus. And we get a lot of data from a lot of different schools, so we can control for factors like the weather and then ask what factors significantly affect ventilation. And unsurprisingly, but disappointingly, we find that schools that are in areas of greater deprivation have lower ventilation and higher CO2. And so when we're trying to address ventilation in schools, we need to try and address this imbalance at the same time. And a lot of schools run with pupil numbers over their official capacity, and those that do exhibit much higher carbon dioxide levels. And so again, we need to think about why we're allowing that to happen in the UK. But ventilation, particularly when you're relying on natural ventilation, isn't enough to ensure good air quality. And particulate matter is one of the main metrics we use to infer air quality metrics, because long-term exposures to high concentrations of PM are well known to have negative health outcomes. And here's a little map of our SAMHE schools and the outdoor government gathered data at the AURN sites that were included in this particular PM analysis. And if we look just over this same period of time that we did examine for the carbon dioxide data, we see outdoor levels across the site, across the government sites closest to schools plotted here, and an extraordinary correlation with the levels measured indoors. And we can see this really big peak in September, and that's associated with a known Saharan dust event that occurred at exactly that time. And crucially, that Saharan dust is making it into our school classrooms and really increasing the levels. So we know from the data that we've analysed that outdoor events happen locally to schools, but also nationally, and affect the PM levels that we see in classrooms. We have shown that about 75% or more of the particulate matter that we measure in schools has come in recently from outdoors, and so we've got to keep a focus on improving the outdoor air, and that's a long ongoing effort. I think in terms of UK schools, what the data has been able to show us is that during warmer periods, the classroom architecture is adequate to provide reasonable ventilation. But when the weather changes, the levels delivered to classrooms are low. And so I think that really questions our choice of strategy in the UK, or highlights a need to really work on some sort of behavioural and educational change. We know that engineering retrofits for ventilation are available both at classroom and building level, and it would be great to see funding for those. And we've also done a lot of work on air filters, in my mind, not really to promote standalone air filters, but to really show what benefits we would receive if we provided cleaner air to our schools. And I'll leave that there, but I think, you know, at least in the UK and in the schools, we really need to maintain a focus on working together with schools, because at the moment there's very little prospect of significant investment in our school infrastructure. And I'll leave it there.